Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey may have crossed the $1.1 billion mark worldwide, but one controversy surrounding the movie refuses to disappear. And now, Mel Gibson has allegedly taken aim at John Leguizamo over comments made during the film's promotional tour. And the criticism goes far beyond whether The Odyssey is actually a good movie. Because Leguizamo's comments about the film's cast have triggered a completely different debate about race, Hollywood, and whether political statements should even be part of promoting a massive movie like this. And here's the part that makes this especially interesting. The movie succeeded financially despite the backlash, meaning the controversy clearly didn't stop audiences from showing up. So what exactly did Leguizamo say? Why has it continued to follow him? And why is Mel Gibson now being brought into the middle of this? We're breaking all of it down. And if you enjoy Hollywood stories without the usual sugarcoating, make sure you subscribe to The Woke Watch, because there is a lot more coming. Let's start with the bigger picture. The Odyssey has now become one of Christopher Nolan's biggest box office successes, crossing roughly $1.1 billion worldwide, despite the criticism that surrounded the movie before and after release. But a successful box office doesn't automatically mean everyone loved the film. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Even though The Odyssey has performed extremely well commercially, I personally found the movie to be very inconsistent. There were sequences that genuinely worked for me. Some of the spectacle was impressive, and certain scenes were exactly the kind of large-scale filmmaking you'd expect from Nolan. The siren sequence was one of the highlights. The Cyclops sequence was another. But then there were other sections that completely pulled me out of the experience, and that's something I'll probably get into in much greater detail in another video. For now, however, the more interesting story isn't even about the movie's box office. It's about one particular actor and the reaction to comments he reportedly made while promoting the film. That actor is John Leguizamo. One of the earliest controversies surrounding The Odyssey involved the casting of Helen of Troy. Critics questioned the changes made to the traditional depiction of the character, while some Greek audiences strongly objected to what they viewed as unnecessary alterations to a story deeply connected to Greek mythology. That criticism became part of a much larger debate over how Hollywood approaches established historical and mythological stories. And whether you agree with those criticisms or not, there is another important point here. The movie still succeeded. Despite the backlash, despite the casting debates, despite arguments over how closely the film follows the original epic, audiences still showed up in enormous numbers. That is what makes the comments surrounding Leguizamo so interesting. According to the claims presented in the original discussion, Leguizamo expressed frustration about the lack of Latino representation in the cast and also made comments indicating that he did not want to support movies featuring an entirely white cast. Those remarks quickly became controversial because critics interpreted them as applying a racial double standard. And that's where Mel Gibson enters the story. The comments attributed to Gibson essentially framed the situation as another example of Hollywood's growing disconnect with its own audience. The argument is straightforward. If an actor publicly rejected a movie because of the race of its cast, would the reaction be the same if those comments were directed toward another racial or ethnic group? That question has become central to the controversy. Gibson's reported criticism went even further, with the actor and filmmaker portrayed as questioning why someone would complain about the ethnic makeup of a cast in a story specifically rooted in ancient Greek mythology. And that's an important distinction. If you're making a story based on Greek mythology, the filmmakers are obviously going to make creative decisions when adapting that material for modern audiences. But critics of Leguizamo's comments argue that complaining about the absence of a particular ethnic group in this specific historical and mythological setting is a completely different argument from criticizing Hollywood's broader lack of representation. That distinction is what has fueled so much of the debate. And according to the original claims, Gibson's reaction was essentially that actors should be appreciative when they are given the opportunity to work on major productions, especially something as enormous as a Christopher Nolan movie. That criticism has obviously created its own backlash, because now we're no longer just discussing The Odyssey. We're talking about the larger culture war surrounding Hollywood, and this is exactly why these comments have continued to follow Leguizamo even after the movie became a box office success. The irony is that The Odyssey didn't collapse under the weight of the controversy. Quite the opposite. It made more than $1 billion, so regardless of how anyone feels about the casting choices, the audience ultimately demonstrated that the controversy wasn't enough to keep them away. But that doesn't mean the controversy disappeared. In fact, some viewers have argued that once they became aware of Leguizamo's comments, it actually changed the way they looked at his involvement in the movie. That's an interesting psychological effect. When you're watching an actor in a fictional role, you're supposed to forget the person behind the character. You're supposed to believe in the world of the story. But once an actor becomes heavily associated with controversial political or cultural statements, some viewers find it difficult to separate the performer from the character. And that's exactly what critics claim happened here. Now, whether that is fair to the actor is another question entirely. An actor can play a character brilliantly while holding opinions that audiences strongly disagree with. Those two things can exist at the same time. But Hollywood has increasingly blurred the line between entertainment and politics, and that's why comments made during a press tour can sometimes become almost as important as the movie itself. And The Odyssey is a perfect example. You have one side arguing that Hollywood should become more representative and inclusive. You have another side arguing that established stories shouldn't be altered simply to satisfy modern political expectations. And then you have audiences caught directly in the middle. That's where the discussion surrounding Helen of Troy comes back into the picture. For critics, changing elements of an established Greek epic can feel like changing the identity of the story itself. For others, adaptations are supposed to reinterpret old material for modern audiences. Neither side is going to disappear anytime soon. But there's another reason this particular controversy has received so much attention. Christopher Nolan isn't just another director. His movies are treated as major cinematic events. And when an actor publicly criticizes aspects of the casting or representation in a Nolan production, people naturally pay attention. That's why the comments became part of the conversation surrounding The Odyssey, even while the movie itself was breaking box office records. And this is where I think the larger Hollywood issue becomes much more interesting than the individual personalities involved. If actors want to discuss representation, that's their right. If audiences disagree with those opinions, they have the right to push back. But once an actor starts making sweeping statements about entire racial groups or audiences, the discussion becomes much more complicated. At that point, people are going to question whether the same standards are being applied consistently. That's the double standard argument that critics of Leguizamo have been making. And it's also the reason Mel Gibson's reported comments have gained so much attention. Gibson has never exactly been known for staying quiet when he disagrees with something. Throughout his career as both an actor and filmmaker, he has repeatedly positioned himself as someone willing to challenge Hollywood's establishment. So when his name becomes attached to a controversy like this, the story almost writes itself. But there is another side worth acknowledging. Criticizing Leguizamo's comments doesn't automatically mean every statement attributed to Gibson should be accepted without question. The same standard should apply to everyone. If we're going to criticize actors for making inflammatory statements, we should also examine the claims being made about those actors rather than simply accepting every viral quote as fact. That's especially important in an era where a single clip, headline, or social media post can completely change the public perception of someone. And ultimately, that's what makes this entire Odyssey controversy so fascinating. The movie itself has already won the box office battle. More than $1.1 billion worldwide is difficult to argue with. The Sirens worked for some audiences. The Cyclops worked for others. There are plenty of people who genuinely enjoyed Nolan's interpretation. And there are also plenty of people who believe the film took too many liberties with the original epic. Both reactions can exist at the same time. But the debate over John Leguizamo's comments has become a separate issue entirely. For some viewers, his remarks were simply a political opinion. For others, they crossed a line. And Mel Gibson's reported response has now added another major voice to that debate. Whether you believe Gibson was right, whether you believe Leguizamo's comments were taken out of context, or whether you simply want Hollywood actors to stop turning every movie promotion into a political battlefield, one thing is clear. The controversy surrounding The Odyssey isn't ending just because the movie made $1 billion. In fact, its box office success may have made the debate even more interesting, because now the question isn't whether audiences rejected the movie. They clearly didn't. The real question is whether Hollywood is finally beginning to realize that audiences can separate a movie's quality from the political and cultural messages surrounding its cast. And with The Odyssey now sitting among Nolan's biggest commercial achievements, that's a conversation worth watching very closely. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think about the controversy surrounding John Leguizamo's comments? Do you think actors should be more careful about making statements like these while promoting major movies? And do you think the success of The Odyssey proves that audiences are becoming less interested in Hollywood's political arguments and more interested in simply watching a good movie? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.